Not that long ago, I was cutting a video wherein I said the phrase, "I mostly play new games." Roll the clip.
You wouldn't know it from this channel, but I mostly play new games, even though I don't cover them as often since so many others already do.
This statement is true, but upon finishing the video, I felt like there was a certain looming irony in that the two games I came up with to exemplify new games were a remake of a 90s game and a straight-up boomer shooter that distinguishes itself from the rest of its genre by pulling from the past. Doom Eternal is one of my absolute favorites, so I'm not knocking it, but extra lives just float in the environment. Giant mechs fight kaijus, and there are even VHS and Game Boy camera filters. The game is jam-packed with hallmarks of the 90s, which is perfectly appropriate since the IP itself is a hallmark of the 90s. Still, any way you slice it, these are all things that are designed to activate our rose-tinted glasses of nostalgia and, dare I say, prey on our weakness for memory lane. It's fun, but beware. An overdose of nostalgia can sometimes result in the compromise of one's judgment, often taking the form of blindness to quality in favor of the positive emotions associated with one's past. While the science on the matter is still rudimentary, in extreme cases, side effects of nostalgia can include what scientists are calling shitty opinions that just kind of muck up social gatherings with stinky bullshit that just no one should have to listen to. One of the most famously documented cases was that of Bill Bludenberger, who insisted that Battletoads 2020 deserved Game of the Year, and after enough painstaking debate, his wife just couldn't take it anymore and she left him for Roger from Doug, who said that Sekiro deserved Game of the Year. So I had a little micro crisis. I started to worry, like, uh-oh, have I been infected? Have I caught the nostalgia? I mean, look at the games I praise. Morrowind, Octopath Traveler, Final Fantasy V.
I can't really play real-time Final Fantasy without just being bummed about how much tactical integrity and choice has been lost over the years.
Oh my god, no!
Got your results back. I'm sorry, but the test was positive.
The Link's Awakening remake is way better than Breath of the Wild. New Vegas is the only good Fallout game. Fallout 4 is just, it sucks. Thanks for ruining everything, Todd. Really, the only right way to play Sonic 3 is on a CRT TV. Okay, but here's something to think about. By now, video games have been around as a creative medium for at least 40 years, so unless you're just so naive to think that all the good ones just happen to be from the past few years, then theoretically most good games should be what you'd call old, say more than 10 years old, which means if you were to give all games, new and old, a fair objective shake without any bias, then the vast majority of games you judge favorably would be old, unless your standards of quality start and end with graphics and or tech performance, which, I mean, there are a lot of amazing games that don't exemplify either of those things. So the mere fact that you praise a lot of old games doesn't actually make you biased. In fact, if anything, you might be biased if the majority of games you can appreciate are recent, since the majority of games out there are not recent. Imagine being a movie fan but saying, I don't have time for old shit like Terminator or Blade Runner or Pulp Fiction. Talk about shitty opinions, by the way. You cannot pass on these, but obviously that doesn't mean you can't also love new stuff evenly. Sure, some games age poorly, but there are others that are 20 plus years old and remain the best of their genres. But even still, it doesn't take an expert to see that nostalgia plays a big role in our appreciation of games, and that can act as a pitfall when we appreciate games that simply trigger positive emotions that we associate with the past, as opposed to innovative design that might advance games for the better. So I started looking around at the games I enjoy and the ones that I pass on. I was looking to see if I've actually been less inclined to try a game or praise a game if it didn't remind me of the past in any conceivable, even subconscious level. And what I found was actually, with or without the filter of my own taste, it's difficult to even momentarily talk about new games without stumbling upon some sort of nostalgia play. The fact that nostalgia creeps into everything I like has less to do with my taste and more to do with the current state of the industry. I mean, look at popular games of the past few years. I already covered Doom Eternal, but Cyberpunk is dripping with 80s and 90s sci-fi flair. It's an outright amalgam of nostalgic sci-fi like Blade Runner, Ghost in the Shell, and Akira. Fallout is so obsessed with the past that I'm kind of bummed the collector's edition wasn't delivered by a milkman. Would that really have been so hard? I mean, go big or go home, Todd. Halo is currently in a coma resulting from a botched facelift meant to make it look like Halo 1 from 20 years ago. And what about Final Fantasy VII Remake? It's just this game again. Same for all these, by the way. Remakes are on the front line of the nostalgia invasion. Of course, there's also this, and this, none of which really need any explanation whatsoever. Games across the board seem obsessed with the past in one form or another. Nearly everything on the market is some sort of remake or nostalgic reboot, and we cannot get enough of it. Yeah, I'm talking to you, Bowser. If you think it's beneath me to demand a remake of this one right square in the middle of this rant, well, you've got another thing coming. So, you've heard it 1,000 times. The question inevitably becomes, are we just out of ideas? Have we reached a critical tipping point where we are so bankrupt of new material that even on the off chance that we invent something new, it essentially amounts to interchanged reminders of the past? I often hear the same train of criticism when it comes to modern film, but when I look at the history of artistic conventions with a broader scope, it turns out this is nothing new, not even remotely. I mean, really, you can take this pretty much all the way back. When ancient Rome was the center of Western civilization, the Romans drew nearly all of their aesthetic identity straight from the Greeks. Eventually, neoclassical creators as far as America did the same to both of them. I suppose they were mimicking the past to tap into our reverence for it, but we don't seem to fault them for that. Probably because it turns out you can't have an artistic convention of any kind without some amount of this. If no one borrowed from anyone who came before them at all, how could there be artistic conventions in the first place? Historically speaking, art swings away from its roots and then back to its roots again and again, much like a pendulum, making every art movement a reaction to or evolution of what came before. And that historic context is vital to a work's significance. So, all things considered, it actually tracks quite well that video games are bound to do the same. And so what we're seeing is just the manifestation of that with all these throwbacks and remakes. And by the way, it's not like remakes are a modern invention either. Look how many classic sculptors did their own take on David. For that matter, don't get me started on music. A lot of Led Zeppelin songs were not originally Led Zeppelin songs. They pulled their style and even much of their material from old blues artists like Robert Johnson, Howlin' Wolf, and so on. And then Jack White and the likes would later do the same. The examples go on forever, but I gotta get back to video games eventually here. So every time you've ever seen a game where a dude has a sword and shield and he fights a dragon, etc., that too is some evolution of material that came before it. Most of these trace back fairly directly to Lord of the Rings or King Arthur. This was true with the original Legend of Zelda, and it's true with Witcher 3, albeit with a few more links in the chain. Ultimately, the whole reason that this classical fantasy model is so tried and true is because it's in the core of our cultural DNA and has been for centuries. We grew up watching Disney movies and seeing iteration after iteration of brave knights rescuing princesses or slaying dragons or what have you. And what happened was somewhere throughout our coming of age, we as an audience formed an attachment to those tropes, which is why it keeps manifesting over and over through the generations. Clearly, we have a soft spot for this model of fantasy. Dare I call that nostalgia? So ultimately, I guess what I'm saying is nostalgia is an inescapable bind when it comes to how we appreciate aesthetics. The only variable is how aware of it we are, or perhaps how heavy-handed it is in certain works. That's not an excuse to let nostalgia cloud your sense of objective merits. In fact, if you're a critic, it's imperative that you not let that happen. But at the end of the day, it's universally true that everyone's taste is scaffolded by what they grew up with. So I suggest that we cautiously embrace it and acknowledge it, while remaining diligent not to get drunk off of it. I hope this video has provided some food for thought. Thanks for watching, and if you enjoyed this video, consider checking out the rest of my channel. I'm still a little fish on YouTube, so your like, comment, and/or sub would go a long way. Thank you, and I hope to see you next time.